All right, so today I want to start by talking a little bit about kind of craziness, I guess, in that Canada, things aren't looking very good right now. And I mean, the next thing I wanted to get into is gonna, get into that as well. But um, this is from Paul Mitchell, and he starts by saying, in a totalitarian state, freedom will not be taken suddenly from us. From day to day, from Tuesday to Wednesday, they will skim it slowly, take it away piece by piece, even giving back sometimes, but always less than was taken. Every day for a little in unnoticeable amounts until one day after a few or several years we will wake up in captivity, but we won't know about it. We will be convinced that it should be so because it has always been like that. Um, Cornel Filopoulos, that's definitely not how you pronounce that last name, but nonetheless, a Polish novelist. So this is kind of what's going on. Now, a lot of people kind of scoff at it, but the point being is that regardless of whether or not whatever wherever you think that we're going as a country, regardless of what you think, this is a perfectly realistic scenario, right? Because 95% of people would not question anything up until the point of it being too late, and that is the problem. Is that we have a population of people that is so ignorant, dumbed down from the public schools and the universities and the mainstream media, so on and so forth, that people just wouldn't notice, right? Like they always sell it to us as, oh, it's for your safety and it's for the common good and all this kind of stuff. And eventually, you're all locked up and you have no freedoms because again, it's for the common good, right? So that's kind of the craziness that's going on in Canada right now. I mean, you have Ontario and Quebec, I believe. Maybe I think it's just Ontario, but I think Quebec might be too. Already talking about relocking down. The cases have gone up again there. Again, ironically enough, even though they have mask mandates in the big cities, and they have for a while. Again, like I mentioned a million times now, it seems exactly what I said was going to happen. It'll have no effect on the spread. In fact, in this case, it's actually had a worse effect. But again, I don't think masks really do a whole heck of a lot. If sick people wear them, yeah, but healthy people, people who if they get it, they pose no risk to going to having to go to the hospital or dying. It makes no sense, right? Like it makes no sense whatsoever. And the point being is that it's exactly what I said was going to happen because I debated with many people, almost always online, but that's what I said. Yeah, it's going to have no effect, and one of the main reasons I gave is that the vast majority of people do not wear masks properly, and every single one of these people said, "Oh, well, some people wearing masks properly will still have a positive effect, even if it's half the people, it'll still have a positive effect," and that's exactly what I told people. No, it actually won't. Because again, if the vast majority of people aren't doing it, you might as well have nobody do it. And no, they insisted I was wrong, and guess what happened? Well, sure enough, exactly what I said was going to happen. Now they're all saying, well, people aren't wearing them properly. Well, yeah, I told you that 2 months ago when we were debating this. Like, again, like these people are so stupid. It's not even funny. Like, so stupid. So anyway, that's the first thing I wanted to bring up. But yeah, I mean, Canada's freedoms are slowly being taken away. We basically only have free speech on paper. It doesn't exist in reality too. And all these people that like to, defend Trudeau to the nth degree, no matter what they do, they're like, oh no, we have free speech, just not the hate speech. Well, no, if you don't have the right to say things that make people uncomfortable or mad, then you don't have free speech because that's the whole point of free speech. If free speech only existed to protect speech that was popular, then there would be no point having it enshrined in the Constitution or in law, right? Like there would be no point because everybody agree, or the majority of people agree with it, right? The whole point of free speech is so people can say uncomfortable things, right? Like that's the whole point of it. Now, I know that most of these people have probably heard that before. They don't care. The reason why they always say that kind of stuff is that they defend the censorship because they perceive it to benefit their tribe, and usually it does, right? So that's why they do that kind of stuff. And the next thing I wanted to get into, speaking of Canada going down a terrible path, um, this is from Tom Quiggin. He says, not sure I understand this. Aaron O'Toole says he will take a Canada first approach to the economy, which is good, while saying he supports the Paris Accords, which is pretty much the opposite and follows Justin Trudeau's policies on decarbonizing Canada. And this is the problem with Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives in Canada, is that, and this is the thing too, that I think Canada is headed down a very dark path, because no matter who we end up with, we're going to be screwed, right? Because if we end up with the liberals, well, we know we're screwed, because look at the last 5 years, right? Like, we've slowly progressed, downward. And if we end up with the conservatives, we end up with the most watered down version of a conservative you can possibly imagine, which is basically a liberal. Like let's just be honest. Like, most of these conservatives could have ran as a liberal as recently as about a decade ago, and nobody would have questioned it, right? Like, nobody would have questioned it. And that's the problem, is that we have no legitimate opposition anymore. We have no legitimate opposition. Now, from Aaron O'Toole's perspective, because again, a lot of people wonder, why do they do this kind of stuff? I still disagree with him, right? Like, I still disagree with him. But from his perspective, um, he brought up all the time about how, oh, whenever he goes door knocking, or he has staff that goes door knocking, he probably doesn't do it as much anymore. Um, one of the most common things you hear people bring up is, oh, what are you guys doing to address climate change, right? And this poses a big hang up for them, for conservatives in general, right? Because either they can actually be principled and actually live in reality, and reality is, we don't need to be doing a whole heck of a lot for climate change. I mean, it's the idea of man-made climate change isn't even a thing, right? Or at the very least, to a significant degree. There is no evidence that human activity is causing a significant change to the climate. There is no evidence to that. Now, again, what they always bring up is they'll link to you some graph of, oh, the temperature has gone up a little bit over the last 100 years. Well, that doesn't mean anything, because the temperature has gone up much more than that, um, long before, fossil fuels were existing on a large scale, right? So you need to prove that humans are causing said increase, and they never do that, right? They never do that. They always just It's always just a classic, correlation must mean causation, right? Like, that's always what they do. So that's the thing when it comes to climate change. But nonetheless, this is the problem, right? And here's the other thing too, is that if Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives do manage to get elected, they probably lose some support in the West, right? Because to get full support in the West, I don't think you can support a carbon tax. I don't think you can support staying in the Paris Accords. But to get enough support in the East to get elected, you probably have to do that kind of stuff. So again, that's the problem, that the Conservatives are in. They're between a rock and a hard place. Now, if you ask me, you simply live up to actual principle, and if you lose, you lose. At least you lost with some principle, right? And the Conservatives have consistently gone away from that, right? Like, at the very least lately. If you wanted to argue under Harper, maybe I still probably would disagree. I mean, Harper, I mean, for me was just, I mean, I never actually was old enough to vote for him, but um, just conservative enough to vote for. Like just actually, I shouldn't say that in 2015, but not the first two times, but nonetheless, he was like just conservative enough to vote for. Like, Trump is another. Trump was actually probably he has a little bit of wiggle room, to be honest, given the fact that he's pushed back on the whole intersectionality garbage lately, and he's brought some troops back. He's negotiating peace deals. Trump definitely has some wiggle room before I wouldn't vote for him. And does that mean I disagree with him on a ton of stuff? But again, the alternative is socialism, and maybe even worse, right? Like, it may be socialism with mass unrest, and that's I mean, a whole different deal. Canada, I think, is due for unrest at some point. I just don't think it's as imminent as the States. But again, Canada is definitely going down some dark path, and this is the problem with Aaron O'Toole, is that you can't claim this whole Canada First mantra and support the Paris Accords and a carbon tax. Like, you can't support it. That's not how it works, right? And this is the thing too, that he's trying to play the whole Trump thing, right? And this is another thing the Canadians always scoff at. Oh, he's trying to use Trump tactics. Well, Trump won the last election, and he's at this. If the election were tomorrow, he would win the next one by even more than he won last time. So this is the other thing too. That these people are so stupid that they think that what Trump is actually clearly rather clever when it comes to this kind of stuff, but they're too ignorant to admit it, right? So yeah, this is the problem when it comes to Canada, that the options are Justin Trudeau, which is, and the Liberals, or even whoever takes over for him. Whoever takes over for him, I would bet money will be as radical or more radical than he is. Um, but that's the problem, is that you end up with a far left socialist government, or at the very least pushing for far left policies and socialism, or you end up with a about as watered down as you can possibly get conservative government, which isn't going to do a whole heck of a lot to help Canada, because what'll happen is they'll get in. I mean, things will probably be a little bit better than under the Liberals. The problem is that the mainstream media will do their usual. They'll spend all day and all night complaining about them, and eventually people will. And here's the thing too. Eventually they'll probably cut some program or something, which is inevitable at some point, and then things revert, and you get the Liberals again, right? So that's probably what's going to happen. But if an election were held tomorrow, I would still bet on the Liberals. But again, that's just me. But anyway, speaking of Trump, actually, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and he may even have been nominated for another one, to be honest. I heard he may be nominated for two. But I mean, this is a good thing too. And this is the thing when it comes to politics now, is that people need to have the ability to call a spade, right? They need to do that. And this is the biggest reason causing all the political polarization, is that for anybody who doesn't support Trump, or at the very least disagrees with him, if you're not congratulating him and giving him one on this, then you have no credibility. Like you have no credibility whatsoever. And and this is the way you can tell too, if someone's a complete zealot when it comes to their politics. You simply ask them, okay, what could the person you vehemently, I mean, if you're conservative, what could Trudeau do that would get you to, at the very least, not maybe full on support him, but be like, yeah, that was a good thing he did. And the same thing goes for the left. Like, what could Trump do to be like, yeah, that was a good thing? And this is one of them. And the fact that pretty much none of these crazy lefties are admitting this, admitting Trump is right on this kind of stuff, just goes to show that they're vastly zealots. Now, again, people say, oh, you're the same with Trudeau. Well, yeah, if Trudeau, stopped trying to ban guns for no reason, if Trudeau stopped pushing a carbon tax that clearly does not work, the evidence is overwhelming on it. If Trudeau stopped pushing this far left agenda, yeah, I would be like, yeah, Justin Trudeau finally doing something right. I would make a video about it. But he's not doing it. And Trump is doing stuff that you'd think that if the left actually had principle, they would be supporting, right? And that's the reason why I just can't bring myself to like the left in any way, shape, or form. I'm not big on the right either. More of a libertarian. Want the least amount of government possible. In an ideal world, no government. Is that realistic? Probably not. So we're probably going to need the least amount of government possible. And anything that we can do to get closer to that policy is a good thing. And having less troops in the Middle East, or less war in foreign countries, is getting closer to that goal. So you have to support it. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is from Tom Quiggin, and he um, replies to a tweet here by saying, or from Robert Spencer, saying, Somalia bill introduced in Parliament that would allow a girl to be married as young as 10. And he says, I wonder where all the Canadian and US feminists are on this one. Girls being abused, but useless third and fourth wave feminists will do nothing. I mean, this is the big problem the many big problems when it comes to feminism, is that they don't actually really care about the real issues. They largely just care about the make believe issues that they can make themselves feel good about themselves. The fake pay gap and the fake, ooh, we live in a sexist society and history is rampant with sexism. Well, no, it really isn't, right? Like, um, unmarried women, actually make more than unmarried men. The gender pay gap is almost exclusively the fact that married women just don't want to work as much. Why? Because a lot of times they're forced to not be able to work, because having kids. And number two, why would you want to work when, your husband makes enough to get by? Like, it doesn't make any sense, especially when the kids are young. Like, if you want to go back to work when the kids are a little bit older, yeah, that might make sense, especially if you need the money. But when you're younger, it doesn't make any sense. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so, but again, and not to mention too, throughout history, were there some policies that benefited men? Yeah, but men were also forced to, go storm the beaches of Normandy and, fight the Nazis, and, even World War One was even worse than World War Two. So the idea that, oh, men had the right to vote and women didn't, therefore sexism in the past, is complete BS. Like, it's complete BS. Um, and the only way that it would not be BS is if you're willing to argue that you would rather have the right to vote and have to go, storm the beaches of Normandy, for example, or sit in a bunker all day and get shot at by machine guns for months on end, like in World War One. You'd have to argue that that is preferable to not having the right to vote and not having to do that, right? And I think the vast majority of people would choose not having the right to vote. The problem is nowadays we're so shielded from reality that a lot of people can pretend that's not reality, right? But like I was saying, is that people nowadays are so shielded from reality that's never going to happen again. Like there almost certainly will not be a draft again at some point, because if there is another world war, it's going to be largely nuclear, and it'll be fought a lot more with technology rather than massive amounts of humans, right? So that's one of the many reasons why that's just not realistic. So people can get up on their high horse and pretend like, oh, sexism in history. Well, no, it's really not. It's really complete BS too. And when you get the whole story, all of a sudden people kind of change their minds on those things. And here's the other thing too: people always bring up, oh, the sexism of like the 50s and 60s. Well, the reason that women overwhelmingly were homemakers, during those times, is because of the baby boom, right? Like, we had massive amounts of kids, and someone had to look after those kids. Now, again, the left solution is, let's just throw them in daycare and in public schools so we can indoctrinate them. But that's not overly realistic in a country that actually has some principle and some actual values. Yeah, you don't do that, right? So yeah, the fact that feminists aren't absolutely outraged about stuff like this just goes to show that, I mean, I've said it a million times, I've given tons of examples, but feminism has no credibility whatsoever, like no credibility whatsoever. And like I said, if they actually did, they would be calling out the real issues, right? But they wouldn't be talking about these make believe issues. It's the same thing with BLM, right? Like, if they actually cared about racism, and if they actually cared about black people, they wouldn't worry about the 10 to 15 people that get the blacks that get killed by police every year. They would be as worried. They would be more worried about the, what, 6, 7, 8,000 blacks that are killed by other blacks. They would be worried about the millions of blacks that still are enslaved to this day. They would be worried about the welfare state, which is what causes the vast majority of the pain and suffering of the black community. They would be worried about the drug war, which is also plays a big factor into it. Like, if they actually cared about these issues, that's what they'd be bringing up. And like I say, it's the same thing when it goes for feminists, right? Like, if they actually cared, they wouldn't be wanting to only address the make-believe issues. They would be actually worried about the actual ones. But why do they not do that? Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. If you actually deal with the actual issues, you are going to piss off a lot of people, and not just to a small degree. You will get death threats. You may even get beat half to death. I mean, look at what happens when you don't submit to the mob when it comes to BLM, right? Like, that's why people don't do it. It's no longer, very small negative outcomes when it comes to disagreeing and speaking up with this kind of stuff. No, it is literal. You could get killed for it. And it's not like a one in a million thing anymore. So that's why people don't do this kind of stuff. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.